And thanks to all for coming, whether online or to Brno. I have to admit that my talk is pretty ambitious in what I would like to cover today, so I will just jump right into it. There are two prerequisites that you should know. What Mr. Director has already mentioned, that my project is yet to start. It will start this year, and of course there is a lot of work to be done, so do not expect from today's talk any serious conclusion. This talk is not going to be conclusive. It's going to be a sort of presentation of premature ideas and sort of vision of the project rather than anything else. And the second prerequisite is that I actually sprinkle this presentation with these quotes from the MSc proposal. As Mr. Director has already said, the project has been funded through a Maria Skłodowska Curie Action Postdoctoral Fellowship that, I think that I've heard from some of you that actually you are interested in trying to apply. So with these quotes, you can get actually inspired how to, so to speak, translate your own research ideas into the language of the proposal, this peculiar MSCA language. Okay, and now I'm going to play a video abstract of the project. You may think that this is a little bit a cheeky thing to do because I've come all the way from Prague to Brno to actually show you a video in which I'm talking, but I'm going to do it nonetheless because there are, I think, a lot of audiovisual clues about what today's presentation is going to be about. Okay.
Doing ethnographic fieldwork in 2013 in Slovakia, I found myself at a musical gem of Romani musicians where I experienced a very interesting moment. A keyboardist was asked to play tone B to help another musician, a bass guitarist, tune up his musical instrument. When he responded, there was a moment of confusion. It became obvious that the musician didn't play tone B, but tone G. He didn't mishear, he simply didn't know where B was located on the keyboard. Well, nothing really surprising if the musician were a music beginner. But that musician that night accompanied all of the songs well, flawlessly and with flair. Much later, I realized that this moment was a typical manifestation of a phenomenon with impacts throughout my ethnographic field and far beyond. The musician back then might have not known where tones and notes are located on the keyboard, but he knew something far more important to this music culture. He knew Romani chords. But first, let me briefly introduce my previous work upon which this proposed project is based. I started researching the music of Slovak Roma in 2013, at that time focusing on the question of Romani musical enculturation, that is, how Roma grow into their musical culture. I set about questioning the famous myth that Roma have music, so to speak, in their blood. I investigated and described the unique system of musical teaching and learning that gives rise to these supposedly inborn musical skills. Later in 2017, I started exploring the professional musical craft of Slovak Romani musicians. I described how their professional musicianship works from the perspective of three theoretical approaches: theories of ethnicity, theories of economic anthropology, and impression management theories. Returning to the question of Romani chords can be seen as a distinctive harmonic language of Slovak Roma. It is a musical feature with which Roma spice up their music and something they consider a root of their entire musical culture. Romani chords stand at the intersection of all the topics just mentioned. They are like the tip of an iceberg, reflecting various features of Romani musical culture and in fact the culture and society of Roma as a whole. Firstly, Romani chords can be approached through theories of impression management and ethnicity performance. They are an enactment of Romani ethnicity in music. It has been shown that Roma often consider their chords as a musical feature that markedly differs from the musical interpretation of non-Roma as something typically Romani, something that Roma proudly consider but their own.
Jo, toto jsou ty cigánský postupy.
Jo, to je to naše.
Secondly, Romani chords are a reflection of professional music-making practices. Many Romani communities have had this professional relationship with surrounding non-Romani majorities for centuries, and Romani chords are an important part of the skills that Romani musicians need to master to perform their professional craft successfully.
Když budu hrát na zábavě pro 200 lidí, pro 300 lidí a zahraju sérii čardášů, tak si myslím, že v ten daný moment, jo, v té zábavě a tak dále, nikdo z těch hostů, tanečníků nepostřehne, jestli zahraju teču mi dav, páno můj, anebo teču mi dav. Nepostřehne to nikdo, protože ta rytmika tam zkrátka jede, funguje, jsou v úletu, tancují a hotovo.
Thirdly, Romani chords are a consequence of specific enculturation, growing into music, and transmission, that is how Roma transfer their musical skills across generations and among their peers. Romani chords are a fundamental element both for growing musical knowledge and passing it on.
Ešte tí starí cigáni nám vysvetľovali, že aký je to akord. Už vtedy vedeli, že akord, ale z nót nikdy v živote nehrali, ani to nepoznali, ale už akordy vtedy poznali, že povedzme, keď to bolo, ale už úplne tí starí cigáni, tí hrali naozaj podľa sluchu. Kde položili prst, tak stade hrali.
Fourthly, Romani chords are an example of musical knowledge that is transmitted with the help of vision. It seems that Roma acquired their chords with the help of visual references, that is, looking at how fingers on a musical instrument are configured for each chord. This is further strengthened through the kinesthetic experience and haptic memory. In other words, as Romani musicians in Slovakia say, pozerať sa na prsty, that is, looking at the fingers of the other musician, is the most natural way to learn a musical instrument. The last and most important question regarding Romani chords is how Roma conceptualize, understand, and theorize their chords. While in music studies, chords are usually approached through theories in which particular notes are linked together by mathematical relations, it seems that Romani musicians have their own ways of understanding. These conceptualizations and theories grow from Romani musical aesthetics and folk knowledge that has been passed on for many generations. They are a part of what Roma proudly consider their cultural heritage, and they are a factor in musical and ethnic self-determination.
Takže to romský v každém Romu je. Jo, pořád tam zůstane, pořád tu šestku, ať chce nebo nechce, tak pořád ju tam slyší a stejně ju tam dá.
Oni ty naši Romáci, a když budou hrát druhou písničku, jo, tak to bude znít jak mou. Rozumíte? Nebo to mají v sobě zakořeněný. To není, že prostě, že to je jako naučený, nebo něco. Oni se s tím narodili takhle.
So now that we know what Romani chords are and what perspectives can be taken to explore them, what are the best methods to untangle all these mysteries hidden beneath the tip of the iceberg? In 2019, I did pilot research among several Romani accordionists in Slovakia. I looked at the phenomenon of Romani chords as three distinct types of data. Firstly, sonic data, extracted in the form of MIDI directly from a specially adapted musical instrument. Secondly, visual data, gathered with the help of video. And finally, ethnographic data, information retrieved from interviews with the musicians.
A učil tě někdo tady ty akordy? Jak to sluchama. Ani tě někdo neukazoval, nikoho se neukazoval.
This innovative approach, which involves these three types of data treated as one complementary dataset, has led to intriguing insights and proved a robust and holistic way to look below the tip of the iceberg. For instance, look at this Romani chord that the accordionist Zolo from Klenovet showed me. A theorist trained in Western harmonic practice may have difficulty choosing an appropriate name for such a chord, even more so as Zolo did not indicate what the root of this chord was. The note A is doubled. The chord lacks a third degree, or a fifth when look at it as rooted on F, and it features the dissonant interval of a minor second. Yet, in Zolo's performance, such a chord has its place and even a name, a dimensoni chord. So to sum it up, the proposed project is the first bottom-up case study anywhere in the world dedicated to the topic of Romani chords. It is rooted in a topic of clear local significance, but it interweaves several threads of contemporary academic debates, and it will enrich the global research communities of ethnomusicologists, anthropologists, music scientists, and Romani studies scholars. The project also aims to be an important step toward preserving the European intangible cultural heritage of Roma, an ethnic minority which is neglected and marginalized in many countries of the European Union to this day.
Right, so that was the video abstract, and now returning to the presentation. So in today's talk, I'm actually going to cover these two big topics. First and foremost, I will try to cover what you could have seen in the video abstract as these 5 strands upon which the whole project stands. That is, the state of the art of the project. And the second part of the presentation, it's going to be somewhat shorter, is going to be dedicated to methodology of the project. How am I going to acquire the data? Okay, let's reintroduce the concept because I framed this Romani chords concept into this huge mystery of Romani music. And Romani music is indeed quite an enigmatic phenomenon, and one of the most enigmatic things that employs many scholars, whether anthropologists, ethnomusicologists, Romani studies scholars, including myself, is its musical variability. That is, as you can see, as you can read from the quote, the term Romani music embraces the flamenco of Spanish gitanos, the gypsy jazz of French manouche, the manole of Romanian lautari, and the Magyar nota of Hungarian cigányok, to name just a very few. Now, if you look at these all sorts of genres and styles that I've just mentioned, you don't have to be quite an ethnomusicologist to see that these genres have actually very little in common, and yet there's one peculiar thing that they do have in common, and this is that they are all regarded as typical genres performed by Roma. In some of these contexts, Roma actually hold virtual monopoly to perform these genres, and this is like the first mystery. How is that even possible? That there's one ethnic group spread across Europe, being brilliant musicians and yet having nothing in common. And that's one simple explanation for it, and that is that music of Roma is not derived from something that they gathered. They brought from India through their migrational path that lasted like 15 centuries, but in fact, Romani music is more or less a reflection or some sort of creative reinterpretation of the music cultures of surrounding non-Romani majorities. And this is further strengthened through the fact that many of these Romani communities have developed sort of like professional music business relationship almost. That is, they were supposed to actually satisfy the wishes of the non-Romani majorities in playing the repertoire with which non-Romani majorities are familiar. Thus, as you can see from the literature, musical borrowing, copying, and even stealing have been identified as something typically Romani. But can actually someone sell mere exact carbon copies of the repertoire? No. They basically the strategy that Romani musicians employ is that they have developed certain distinctive styles, distinctive ways of performing the repertoire that sounds a little bit familiar to us, that is non-Roma, and yet it's somewhat strange in a way. So this is the main frame of the project. Romani chords, I argue, is very specific feature, very special way of harmonic accompaniment among Romani, not just professional, but Romani musicians in Slovakia, and this is the way how they make music that is somewhat familiar to us, make sounding a little bit strange. Right, and like I said, there are like 5 scholarly approaches through which we can now approach this phenomenon, and I'm going to introduce the contemporary scholarship about all these approaches. So let's have a look. So to start with the first one that are entitled as Romani chords as ethnic impression management. Now, I'm going to be a little bit simplifying, and I'm going to be probably too didactic, so apologies for it. The fact is that the theme and the scholarly topic of Romani ethnicity is somewhat controversial. You know, it's very fragmented field, really charged with a lot of bitter disagreement, a lot of emotion and controversies. Some of you may remember the case how one scholar based in Western Bohemian University, you know, publicly argued that there's no such thing as Romani ethnicity, that Romani ethnicity is so peculiar, in fact, that it cannot be even considered like an ethnicity, right? So I actually decided to contribute to this fragmented field in my own way, and what I did was, maybe it's interesting to reframe this question, and rather than asking what Romani ethnicity is and how to define it, it's probably better to ask, you know, what Romani ethnicity does. What does it mean to be Roma? What sort of everyday ethnic agency you need to pursue if you are, so to speak, wearing this Romani skin, Romani ethnicity. And basically what I did was to, greatly inspired by theories emerging from Frederick Barth mainly, and the scholarship that went afterwards, I noticed that there is indeed one very peculiar thing about Romani ethnicity, as you can see on the scheme here, and that is that there is it's really significantly defined, especially by these exclusion processes. Now I'm going to be deductive so that you know that what I'm talking about. You know, this is like the casual negotiation of ethnicity according to Barth. You know, you have some sort of exclusion processes that is, you know, like Polish, Slovak, Hungarian, they say, you are Czech, you don't belong with us, you are different. These are the exclusion processes. But then you have also inclusion processes. You have something, you know, we speak the same language, we like the same beer, we support the same hockey team, we tend to hang together when our flight is cancelled, you know, because we are Czech. We have this sort of inclusion processes that hold us together. And what I notice in ethnic agency of Roma is that their like everyday ethnic agency is very much affected by the fact that they are defined as the others, as the group that doesn't belong with us. And what I did next was that I actually looked how this relates to Romani musicianship. And I noticed that there are very interesting situations happening every day, because if you are Rom, being born in peripheral regions in Slovakia, where I did my research, you sort of try to, you know, under the effect of this paradigm boundary of these exclusion processes, you try to under-communicate your, so to speak, ethnic boundary marker. So what it means, for example, you don't teach Romani language to your kids because you don't want them to be associated with this very peculiar Romani ethnic marker. You sort of don't hang out with other Roma. You sort of hang out with you know, your family and so on, but you don't just like go and try to, you know, be friends with other Roma just on the basis of their ethnicity. The other thing is that you don't want to be associated with poverty, just to say, you know, very brief examples. And yet, you have the case of musicianship, that is, you stay on musical stage, and all of a sudden, you are not just expected, but even welcome to oversell your Romanes, to over-communicate these ethnic boundary markers. That is, you are welcome to whatever speak in Romani language, you are very welcome to sing in Romani language, but you're also very welcome to, you know, show your mercurial nature and so on. And the later thing is that you can even joke about your poverty. You know, you can just be there and say, you know, we haven't eaten for a week, by the way. This is something that Romani musicians do to, so to speak, oversell their Romanes, this peculiar ethnic Romani marker. And I realized that you know, this could be another hour lecture just about you know, my research on ethnic impression management in music. So I'm gonna conclude very simply. If I was to make like one sentence summary of all this issue, if you deal with Romani musical performance, you really need to consider it carefully within the broader frame of Romani ethnicity performance. Let's move to the other page, which is something that I call Romani chords as a skill for music economy practices. Now, if you run a successful Romani band, you are very typically expected to deliver some expectations from your patrons, whether Roma or non-Roma, right? You are supposed to play until the very morning, you are supposed to make all people sing, you are supposed to make all people dance, and also you are supposed to play whatever song comes to anyone's mind, right? This is something that you can see here in Ball, that Romani musicians are known to play by ear and even play songs that they have never heard before. Now, how this is happening? This is actually very common practice that dates back for many centuries. It's something that Slovak calls hranie do uška, playing to someone's ear. And it can be traced, like I said, from the beginning of 19th century, but it's also not just popular in Slovakia, but in fact also in Hungary, Serbia, and Romania. This is going to be picture from amazing ethnography written by Filippo Bonini Baraldi. I don't know whether you can see it, but this is picture from 1960s from Budapest. This is picture from 2004 in Budapest. And what is happening is that there is a non-Romani gentleman, and all of a sudden having, this great inspiration and start singing something. And there is Romani Primáš, the fiddle player, who's just like, yeah, I know the song, and starts immediately accompanying. And these are two pictures from my own field from 2019. So there's again non-Romani gentleman. Anyone knows what he's doing? Anyone could guess? So yeah, I guess the clue is right here. Is putting money into the Primáš violin. So this is actually economic practice with which Romani bands can significantly increase their honorarium. There's a couple of €100 that goes like as an extra income. And now the question, do you think anyone could do it? Is it something that you need to be born with or anything? No, the fact is that you just need to acquire very specific musical skills, those skills that are not so much taught in music schools, let's say, such as you can see here in Ball, knowledge of harmonic progression, the ability to immediately transpose one song, a song from one key to another. And also this all concerns, especially when you play harmonic-based musical instruments such as piano, accordion, cymbalum, you name it. But also if you are actually Primáš, if you are the first fiddle, you need to be able to communicate with the rest of the band. What keys are we in? So again, what's my argument about Romani chords being a skill for music economic practice? I argue basically that Romani chords is indeed some, or let's say the knowledge of chords in general, the harmonic progression and so on, is something that is determined for you to musically succeed on the market. And Romani chords play even more peculiar role in it. Right, let's jump to the third strand that I called Romani chords as a consequence of specific enculturation and transmission. Now, this is actually, this scheme is drawn from my even older work that I did back in MA when I was focusing on musical enculturation of Romani musicians, arguing that it differs significantly from the musical enculturation of, in quotation mark, of education of non-Roma, that is from formalized, standardized, and institutionalized musical educational system. Now, what I argue there is that this musicality of Roma is by no means something that occurs naturally or something they have in their genes, but in fact something that you need to learn. And there are different aims why you actually grow into this music culture. So why the standardized system of musical education is in Slovakia, but also in the Czech Republic and elsewhere, is actually intended for classical music production. This is the ultimate aim. The aim of Romani traditional methods of musical teaching and learning is gaining some sort of economic or other forms of capital. Right, and that's why you have very different educational method to reach the same aim, and also you gain different skills. And now what kind of skills I mean is actually here in the quote from the proposal again, that you are able to perform music from memory, that is without written music. You are musically adaptable, you are musically creative, you have improvisational skills, and so on and so forth. Right. So again, what's the role of Romani chords in all this? You can imagine Romani chords as something, being in these educational methods, something that you need to learn to be able to actually achieve these skill and hence the aim of this music educational system. So what I did, I actually had some provisional thesis about growing into harmonies. And what it means is that basically when you are on the left side, that is you go to music school, you want to learn musical instrument, what you do is to learn notes and tones separately first. The first thing that you learn in the music school is that there's tone A, there's tone C, and so on and so forth. You do your first exercises, and then the harmonic thinking, it comes very much later on. And the way how you conceptualize harmonies is basically that they are consisted of multiple notes. Let's put it this way, very simply. While if you are a Romani musician and you are to learn a harmonic accompanying instrument, the way you learn is that you start with A minor. So if you remember how the video abstract started, that I met a gentleman who didn't know where the tone B was located on the keyboard, and yet he was able to fully accompany the whole event with music without making any mistake. This is the typical example of this. And what I would like to argue here is that it really rewires your musical brain very significantly if you just start learning harmonies instead of notes. It's just a very different way of conceptualization. Right, let's move on. Let's move on to the fourth strand that I call visually conveyed knowledge. Romani chords as visually conveyed knowledge. I would like to make a quick poll here in this room. Is there anybody in the room who actually learned a musical instrument without being able to read music? Is there anyone? Don't be shy. Right. So three in the room. Not bad, right? Probably if I asked, do you have any friend who actually learned, music instrument without sheet music? There'll be probably plenty of hands, right? Now, why am I asking? There are indeed ways to learn a musical instrument without actually having to read notes. The scheme here, you probably have some old trend book with this old visual manifestation of chords. So you can learn from there. But what you can do now is to go to YouTube, put teach me guitar, and you have plenty, endless resource of how to learn your first chord, how to play guitar indeed, and how to play guitar well, I would say. And yet you don't have to even know a single note from sheet note. Let's not be so guitar-centristic. You can actually learn piano easily. First, you can find how to play chords on it. But what is becoming extremely popular is this. This is so-called piano roll. I don't know whether you've heard about the case how the CEO of Bandcamp, so pretty influential person on the music in the musical world, he said that this is the future of music. The staff notation is dead. No one's going to read notes. No one's going to even bother with writing this down. This is the future. The piano roll is future. Agree to disagree, whatever you think about it. But the fact is that there are obviously different ways how to learn a musical instrument, not just with staff notation. And one may think, of course, this is going to be black hole in the market of academia, right? Already thousands of papers dedicated to this. But the fact is that there are very, very, very few studies that actually consider role of vision and sort of visual representation other than sheet notes to music development. There's this study that I found from 2012, Crump, Logan, and Kimbra, who did this sort of experiment, and they figure out that indeed, visual representation, of course, have massive impact on how you learn and how to sort of visualize and how to acquire the skill of playing guitar. And this is, by the way, one of the assumption that basically if you are in music school, you have your eyes fixed on staff notation, right? Whereas if you don't look at notes, all of a sudden you have eyes free to roam, and they're actually free to participate in sort of modeling your cognitive brain, your cognition about your development of your musical aptitude, in fact. So, yeah, this is again something that I consider really like a significant contribution of the project, because funnily enough, nowadays, I think what used to be like traditional Romani that they learn in a different way, now actually the entire world is sort of acquiring this, what we consider as traditional Romani, that is learning not from sheet notes, but learn from, say, visual inputs. Right, so that's the fourth thing, and let's move to the fifth thing, which is which I entitled as Romani chords as Romani knowledge and aesthetic. And what is peculiar about this approach is that what I put in bold, that musical theory, Western musical theory, is somewhat has been naturalized in a way how we actually treat it in science, in music studies, and so on. What I mean, I have a beautiful example when I was doing a job interview for my position at the institute. There was Bernard Garay, great ethnomusicologist and friend of mine, and I told everyone about this upcoming Romani chords project, and he was like, "Hang on, what do you mean Romani chords? That's just one chord, right? Why would you need another chord?" And this was also like my biggest fear, that if there was a in the committee for this project, like evaluating it, the first thing he or she would see, but most likely he, I'll talk about it later, would be like, "Oh, Romani chords, what bullshit, we have only one chord." So the fact is that musical harmony is something that occurs, in nature quite naturally, if you like. The way how one tone sort of relates to another, how we perceive it and so on. This is a phenomenon that occurs naturally. And yet, there were gentlemen, most of them living in the 19th century, most of them men, most of them white, and so on and so forth. And they basically invented this musical theory that helped us to understand this phenomenon. But the fact is, if you today go to, say, SMT conference, which is Society for Music Theory, you don't know quite what is the subject, whether it's the natural phenomenon or whether it's the theory that should explain the phenomenon. And so my question here was, could there be any other way to understand this phenomenon of musical harmony? And I'm here with a couple of ethnographic examples from this tentative pilot project. So to remind you, this is this Romani chord that you saw in the abstract, right? So this is a typical example when like person trained in Western harmonic theory, he or she would say, "This is not a chord because it doesn't have a third. You waste your tonal energy and you waste your finger or doubling the tone A, and you have this nonsense dissonant interval of minor second. Why would you even call it chord?" And yet, in class there's accordionists who actually, has this chord in his repertoire, and I think it actually sounds quite cool, despite not being a chord. Another example from my ethnographic field. This is what one Slovak guitarist told me in 2015. "Fine, and now play D minor upside down." Sadly he's no longer with us, this guitarist, so I cannot really ask him what he meant by hits demo naopak. It's like, how would you turn it upside down? So apparently it's something that does not come from Western way of understanding harmony. The third and the last example is, I asked one of my research participants, Janka, why this musician is no longer playing with the band, and she told me because he didn't have good chords. Again, amazing. What does she mean? Or how the other musician meant it? What kind of chords you need to have to disqualify you, from being able to play with the band? It's fascinating. So what I would like to see here is whether the Romani way of understanding is something that can be treated as, Romani way of understanding, Romani knowledge and the Romani aesthetic. And just to be clear on this, I don't want music theory to be a bad guy. It's going to be like a fight against like, Romani music theory and Western musical theory. By no means. What I would like to achieve here is to see whether there's something that one can learn from the other. Right. So that was, if I'm not wrong, this was the 5 threads upon which all this research stands and falls. And just to do a quick recap, these are the key research questions. So I'm going to read it aloud. Each of them is actually dedicated to each of these strands beyond the tip of the iceberg. So what role do Romani chords play in impression management and the enactment of Romanes in musical performance? Right, think about the ethnicity and ethnic performance. What is the significance of Romani chords for Romani professional performance and the musical economy? Right, think about Romani chords as skill for music economy practice. How do Roma grow into Romani chords, and how are Romani chords created, innovated, and spread? This is the question about growing into music culture and passing the knowledge on. What is the role of vision in the acquisition, transmission, preservation, and innovation of Romani chords? Role of vision. Pozerať sa na prsty. And how do Roma perceive, conceptualize, and theorize their chord? This is the last one, the one dedicated to sort of Romani model of understanding of how this all works. Right, so that's the end of the first part of the presentation, and I promise that the second part is way shorter, and it concerns the methodology of the project. So how I'm going to explore this whole phenomenon. So I'm going to explore it actually, you can see beautifully on this slide. The first type of data are sonic data, the visual data, and the ethnographic data. Right. So now, what are sonic data and how I'm going to acquire it and what I'm going to do with them? So as you could have watched in the video abstract, there was this gentleman playing accordion, if you remember. And the way how I acquire this musical data from the instrument is this. I don't think anyone sees it in Brno here because the screen is pretty bright. But so this thing is called MIDI out. And it's, I would say, pretty legendary thing already because it's been firstly introduced in 1982, I think. And it's basically sort of standard in like musical computing ever since. On the right-left corner, you can actually see it, how it is encoded in a hex, which looks pretty scary. But the thing about MIDI, whether you use it in music production or music research, is that they can be easily converted to any type of musical data, such as this music XML. Right. So now, completely forgot that I also. So the ambition of Romani chord project is basically not to be focused just on the accordion, but also on guitar. So I will do the same experiments as I did during my pilot research with guitar. Now here it's going to be a little bit more funky because this is the MIDI control Jimmy G. Sadly, it was a Ukrainian company and they went bankrupt right after the invasion. So sort of trying to find the other way. This is another alternative. This is a pickup that you can put on any type of guitar, and what it does, it just calculates the tension and output the MIDI data, the musical information. Right. So why do I need a musical data? What musical data allow to do is to look at the phenomenon as sort of distinctive type of big data and perform some like big statistical operations to actually look beneath the tip of the iceberg. Now, what I mean is probably best illustrated with this question. So these are like sample questions that I would like to ask. Are there typical Romani chord sequences, that is, typical patterns by which one Romani chord is followed by another? You may remember the gentleman from the abstract who plays something and then he said, this is the gypsy way. So, this is something that you could easily get to know better if you have like couple of samples from various musicians and see really whether this is something that came just from this gentleman's mind or whether this is indeed something that all Romani accordionists, guitarists share. Right. The second question, or example of the second question, do Romani chords consist of any intervals that are not often used in other types of music? then you can reimagine this minor second chord. Like, is it something that only Zolo from Klanovec does, or is it indeed something that all Roma do? And the third example of the question, are chromatic notes in song accompaniments found equally in all keys, or are they more prevalent in particular keys? So what I mean here is this sort of, accordion, Romani, impression management, something that is connected to some keys, or are they really so brilliant and thoughtful that they can actually very easily transpose these peculiar intervals to other keys? So these are some typical questions that I would like to ask when it comes to sonic data. Right. So this is the second big strand of the data, which is visual data. So on the left side, I don't think anyone in Brno sees what is on the left side, but there's the way how I so to speak acquire musical data during my pilot research. That is just putting video in front of the musicians. For this project that I'm going to do, I would like to move towards this kind of acquisition of visual data. This is from the paper Oka and Hashimoto 2013. They actually achieved a pretty spectacular result in acquiring visual data, that is what finger plays what key, just based on the optical recognition, right? So the question, why do I need visual data at all? So first and foremost, I think they really make the sonic data complementary, because some of the Romani accordionists, for example, they actually hold like a couple of keys with one finger. I think if there's anyone who plays piano, it must feel really funny, because would be probably the first thing that they would try really hard to unlearn you in a music school, because you are not supposed to do that. And for Romani musicians, this is very common practice. So now when you look at the musical data, you would, there's 6 fingers in the data. It doesn't make any sense. So this is first reason to really complement the sonic data. And the second reason is that indeed the visual representation of chord is one of the core questions of the entire project. So I'm going to research by gathering visual data whether like visual representation of chords is something that can be treated as sort of vehicle for enculturation, transmission, whether vertical or horizontal. Right, and these are the questions for visual data. How does finger configuration for Romani chords differ from those taught for chords in music school books? That is, how do they differ from the representation that we saw here on the left side, a couple of slides back? Is it something completely new, or is it something somewhat similar to what we know? We are referring to like we who go to music schools. Are there typical fingers configuration for a particular chord among all Romani musicians in particular age cohort or in particular region? So this is the question again that can help to trace the sort of enculturation and transmission, motifs. And are there patterns and finger configurations across various keys? Right, this again asks for the key mobility and ability to perform in various keys. Anyway, let's move to the very last feature of the presentation, which is evaluation of ethnographic data. So, like I mentioned, the chords in general, the harmony in general is something that is considered as linked together with some mathematical relation. But during my pilot research, I actually realized that there are many interesting stories with some anthropological meaning behind all those chords, with those, from something that would be treated by Western musical harmony theory just as like, this is the pure math. So instead, Romani musicians have their stories, and thus another way to acquire the data, analyze the data is through semi-structured interviews. So here are some typical questions that I would like to ask during this ethnographic data analysis. Do musicians have special names for their chords? Referring to this Romani theory of chords. Are some chords more prevalent in professional musical performance than others? Again, considering the Romani chords as a skill for music business. What do musicians report about the origins of the chords they use? Whether they come from observing others or are their own inventions? Question about enculturation and transmission. Are musicians aware of the notes comprising the Romani chords they play? That is, are Romani musicians aware how it fits into this whole Western music theory and so on? And I'm happy to tell you that that was it. So I'm going to do a quick wrap up. So as you can see, the summary is the same that was in the invitation PDF. So Romani chords is something like very specific way of harmonic accompaniment that can be explored through 4 different like anthropological and musicological approaches. First, that sees Romani chords as specific ethnic musical impression management, that sees it as a skill for Romani music business, but you can actually also look at it as a result of specific enculturation and transmission, and also as specific visually conveyed knowledge. And last but not least, I would also like to actually look at Romani chords through this emic perspective, that is how Roma themselves conceptualize and theorize their chords. And this is the summary of the methodology. The way I would like to cover this is to gather sonic data extracted from in the form of MIDI data. Then I would like to see visual data, that is how fingers are configured for each chord, and complement it all together with ethnographic data, that is information gathered during the semi-structured interview with the musicians. There are some references, and this to give the credit to pictures, and this is the website of the project that you can visit. So this is to thank you all for the attention. I'll be looking forward to your questions.
Oh, thank you, Petr, so much for a brilliant presentation. The privilege to start the discussion will have Ondřej Skovajsa, so I kindly ask him to share his comments, claims, or whatever he may have for now. So, Ondřej, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So thank you, and thank you, Petr, for a great presentation. I know your work. I've read your dissertation, and if I should start with methodology, I think you are quite well set, and I have no worries. What I find really wonderful that you combine the state-of-the-art technology, not MIDI itself, but basically an accordion that employs MIDI and a guitar that enables conversion from a analog signal to digital signal and basically manages the transcription into notes. Yet at the same time, when you limit it basically to five fingers, which seems like manageable, and I think this is wonderful. So this is what you didn't do in your dissertation. This is what you are doing now, and I think it can enable you somehow to bring to the European eye, like clearly and distinctly, the complexity of Romani harmony, yet at the same time, like question the very Western conceptualizations. Having said that, like I just what you said last, I felt like when you said I wouldn't be 100% sure whether brilliant Roma musicians are actually not Pythagorean. They might as well, especially those that you quote from our museum. So I wouldn't, of course, like there is this strong expressivity and based on the life stories and emotion, which as you point out and as Baraldi points out, it's the key thing, and making the audience cry in order that the audience throws you the money. But maybe still there is Pythagoras, and there is, as in every music, and as you know very well, there is this huge difference between campfire musicians and musicians who keep on experimenting. So here I just thought, when you talk about, and you talk about it a lot, about like, and you worked on it on your MA dissertation, this idea of showing. I thought that the Romani word for showing, for teaching, actually is sikavel, which means to show, and which I think is instructive in more senses. First, one can view Romani culture with all the keeping in mind all the problematic things of the word. That it's a residually oral culture, as Walter Ong conceptualized it, and where the knowledge is given orally, of course, but not only orally, but also through showing. I think this aspect of that most of the musical learning is taught by being there, by participating there at the event is what happens. But otherwise, my notes, I have still some, but I think my crucial point, or what I would like to maybe most inspiring for you, though you don't really need it because there is but there is this fascinating, for me at least, link between African American music and Roma music. Not only that I see when I record Roma musicians in the Gilora projects, and I have recorded quite already like tens of musicians. There is such predominance of Stevie Wonder, and funk, and it might sound like a very mystical, but not necessarily. If we think of Cornel West, who is currently running for American president, the social justice philosopher, he says that blues is a personal catastrophe lyrically expressed. So is there a connection between minor harmonies and being a minority? Is there a connection between diminished chords and being culturally diminished? I'm mentioning it also because you are mentioning the pariadom, boundary, and so on. And I think there is something really a lot to explore here. Yeah, and it's not only the taste of the musicians, but it's this fascinating harmonical correspondences. Another one is, of course, I would say maybe there could be another inspiration for you to look at the textbooks of the white old men, like Jan Trojan, Moravská lidová píseň, melodika, harmonika, and Kresánek, who is, I would say, even more problematic than Trojan, and who has really, I would say, even like insults against Roma, because he's basically, I think there is this deep regret that the Roma have taken the job from the Igri, say, but still could be inspiring. And yeah, that's really cool when you were saying the minor played upside down. This is actually really crucial. And here I would refer to Walter Ong again. It's very hard to imagine the landscape without letters for us, or it's really hard to imagine the position of the musician who learns completely differently, who basically already starts singing and playing right there at the Bashavel, who doesn't learn to perform but already performs from the very early on. So yeah, wonderful you get this project, and I guess, well, last note maybe I have that also could be interesting to deal, because Roma culture in the Czech Republic that I have been studying so far, as well as the Roma culture in Slovakia that you have been focusing on, what is fascinating there is how is the vocals that they sing in jedničky, dvojky, trojky, the ones, the seconds, and the thirds, which is something that we never, which is something you really don't encounter here with Czechs, and not even so much with Moravians, I dare say, and which is still something really alive among the Roma, and it's fascinating and can contribute to the study of harmony, which I understand you are actually doing. One of the things maybe also is like whether, and I don't know, this is just a subject, what is the difference between harmony and chords? And I think you have a huge, I really look forward to read your next work when you are finished and talk as much. Also to offer you possibility of collaboration on in Giliora and in the of course the what Museum of Romani Culture has to offer. But it's a huge thing. It's not really easy. To study harmony, it's not an easy thing. But wonderful and looking forward and good.
Thank you so much, Ondřej.
So, thank you, Ondřej, for your very in-depth and provoking comments. And of course, Petr will, I'm sure, follow with as clever answer as is possible.
Yes, will do. Ondřej, thanks so much for so much food for thought. I don't know whether you heard the applause engaging, because I think you made very many thoughtful and insightful comments. I don't know whether you know, but Ondřej is actually running an amazing project which is called Giliora, and he's basically collecting songs that nowadays Romani, not Romani musicians necessarily, like professional musicians, but Roma play in their households. And it's a fascinating project. Highly recommend to visit giliora.cz as far as I'm concerned, right, Ondřej? Giliora.cz. And you made so many comments that I'm going to pick the best ones, because if I was to address every single one, we would probably end up at like 6 and we would miss our last train to Prague. Yeah, the 5 fingers, it's actually a very provocative comment, because, especially with accordion, you don't create harmony just with 5 fingers, but you have also left hand, where you have another 5 fingers, and you press buttons, and it changes the harmonies. You're right, this is a little bit of simplification. I'm actually arbitrarily decided to focus on 2 easy instruments, which is guitar and accordion, and I will specifically focus on right hand accordion and left hand guitar. Otherwise it would be literally not manageable, because if you actually count the possibility what, for example, keyboard player has with 10 fingers, that simply it would not be possible to actually make any progress unless you have like full team and lots of robots actually transcribing things for you, maybe for a bigger project. The second thing that I liked very much is the mention about Pythagorean musicians. And this, I need to admit that this was really like my first oversight when I first encountered Romani music, and even my first MA research that you saw in the work. There was the scheme, left side and right side, traditional way of Romani musicianship and standardized system of music education in Slovakia. I think that this was one of the greatest oversight that I made in my research career, that I expected that these are either or approaches. You don't have anything mixed up. But then during my PhD fieldwork, I actually realized that musical education is so much common nowadays, especially in the generation of youngest Roma, in established families, that is, in families where musical craft has been performed for a couple of generations. So then I realized, no, you cannot really separate one from another. What you can do instead is to see how one affects the other, how one impacts the other. And I think if you remember, there was this gentleman, in the video abstract who says, it's in every Roma there's something Romani. So if you've put on a 6 chord, whether you like it or not, and this is obvious from this quote that he knew what it's 6 chord, right? He probably knew what the 6 was, so he probably was educated. I don't know whether this particular gentleman was educated, but it's very likely. So I think, and that's one of the really like ground thing of the project, is that I'm not considering that there's like a Romani musical aptitude being completely detached from the rest of the world, and I'm quite sure that there will be some leaks of like Western musical theory and Western musical way of thinking into Romani way of thinking, and there'll be really interesting like things happening in this respect. Right. The other thing that I really like was the mention of African American music, and the quote, whether being minor and being diminished has something to do with like musically speaking and like or anthropologically speaking. This is really fascinating idea, and maybe we should write something about it, because I think there's indeed, I mean, I'm going to be speculating a little bit, but for example, when you have the modes that are used in musical theory, you have this Dorian and Ionian mode, and this is something, Ionian and Dorian, this is the most beautiful thing that if you think in the old Greek category, that you have these, how do you call it, these columns, the Ion columns and Dorian columns. And then you have like very awful modes in music, which is like Locrian mode. And of course, these like low-end modes are actually named after the ethnics that were not so liked during the old Greek. Just to say this fun fact. And I think there is indeed something about, it's going to be a little bit speculative, I think, but yeah, it will read nicely, I think, this sort of theory that having some minor, for example, in the case of blues, it's blue tones. It's not even like minor third. It's like blue, almost minor third, and like looking at it and sort of compare it. What's the sonic state of being minor? What is the sonic state of being diminished in anthropological sense? I think it's a super fascinating topic. Right. Then you mention. I'm gonna skip these ones because this will be already super long. And I actually going to pick up the last one that you said about vocal harmonies, which I also find particularly cool. So for the rest of you to know, Roma are very good in singing like these parallel voices. Something that they do quite. It seems like naturally, but they have very good practice in it, and they sometimes like sing in 3 parallel voices, and it sounds just beautifully. And they don't have any like theory that you should be the 5th, you should be the 3rd. No such thing. They just like out of the blue intuitively like tune up their voices, and it sounds just great. And I think this is also something that could be considered like enactment of Romanes in music, because Gage cannot do it. Gage are stupid, boring, and they sing just one voice and one solo voice. They wouldn't do in parallel. And the reason why I think it that sometimes I attended Bashavels, the sort of informal musical jam, where all the musicians were drunk and the parallel voices were completely out of tune. And yeah, they're pursuing it because they are Roma. They can do it. It doesn't matter. It's not in tune. It's part of who we are. It's something that you like to show off. Yeah, I guess that's my list. I feel like I should react to. Thanks so much, Andrei. That was great food for thoughts, really.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for your answer. And of course, we do have a lot of music and Roma experts here among us, so I do expect many questions from the audience. But we already do have one question from Tina Magazzini from the Czech, if you may read it by yourself.
Yes, I will read it aloud.
Yeah.
Thank you for a great presentation and sharing this fascinating project. Thank you. My internet connection is somewhat unstable, so I'm writing question instead of asking it via video. Apology for this. From what I understood, the project has a clear local significance, but also potentially important comparative one. The discussion already brought up the potential parallels and or connection with African American music, but no more basic and maybe less ambitious perspective, could you elaborate a bit on whether it may be possible to carry out fieldwork not only in Slovakia but also in other European countries, such as the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Romania, for example? Or is there something specific about the Romani chords in Slovakia that made this methodology not really applicable elsewhere? Yeah, that's such a great question. Just have a sip of tea. Filippo Bonini Baraldi, who is actually my second supervisor of the project, the supervisor of the analytical part, the author of the pictures that you saw in the presentation too. So he told me, this is really interesting, these Romani chords, but in Romania we don't have such thing. In Romania, the harmony just stays the same, stays very conservative. There's no innovation whatsoever. And so I think this is really kind of site-specific. I know that there are Romani chords in the Czech Republic, quite sure. I'm quite sure that you would find like similar way of ornamenting in Hungary, but I think it's more like site-specific. It would be very hard to do some sort of cross-site project with comparison. And the reason why is actually something that I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation. Romani music, in this sense, is sort of creative reinterpretation of the music of the surrounding majority. So the reason why, for example, when you go to Balkan, typical Romani music in Balkan, are these brass orchestra, this great brass orchestra. You couldn't have any like Romani chords because it would just destroy it. It's already like full of micro tune and so on. It's just different music, and you don't just put the Romani chords there just because they are Romani. So I think it's really site specific. Tina, did I answer your question? Because I think there's something also about the African American music.
I think you did.
Yeah. I did.
Yeah, you did. I'm sure. So, questions here? Yeah, Dan?
I'm not a musician, so my question will be related to something. But first of all, thank you very much for a very clear, visually nice and persuasive presentation. I really appreciate it. My question is related to the part of your theorizing where you talked about kind of being in or outside, like when you talked about like different modes of signification when they mobilizing this iconic or symbolic modes of signification to achieve some kind of economic ends. They perform something in a way to achieve some kind of advantage in economic sense. But I felt that like you really played or emphasized a lot kind of intentional dimension of this.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that like a lot of the things that people do in their behavior has some unintentional, unconscious component and also unintentional consequences. So can you reflect on this? Is it possible that this kind of interest in, let's say, unintended consequences of this intentional activity might be something interesting? Because potentially thinking about achieving some kind of economic advantage is one thing, but during this kind of performance and signaling this kind of identity, in the longer run, may also result in some kind of stigmatization, because you kind of achieve certain way of behaving, bodily movement and stuff like that, which actually in other contexts may serve as a kind of something that puts you down within the hierarchy or something. So any kind of is it potentially interesting also this kind of unintentional dimension of this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for this. Is actually a great comment. And if you're really interested in this whole sort of theoretical apparatus I was developing for this ethnicity performance, I'm very happy to send you some of my text. Okay. And so absolutely, yes. That's also one of the things that is kind of discussed often in critical Romani studies, that many scholars made their careers up with the claims that Roma are intentionally performing their ethnicity to get some some benefits. There are brilliant ethnographic studies about the fortune telling, for example. I think Martin Fota was doing excellent work in this respect. Not the fortune telling, but Martin Fota edited a brilliant book that is called Gypsy Economy. I think it was 2016, isn't it? Which is a brilliant book packed with this idea, how. I mean, not all of the contributions, but as far as I remember, there are a lot of contribution dealing with how the sort of Romani ethnicity performance relates to their economic practices, which I think is a brilliant idea. And absolutely think that, for example, the Romani music is an excellent example of the fact that you cannot quite distinguish. Because eventually you get your economic practices that gets incorporated into the music culture, and that has become like part of, say, musical aesthetic, and all of a sudden, what you're playing for gaje, for example, to satisfy their say market needs or whatever, all of a sudden it's also like likable in the families. So all of a sudden you basically develop with the economic practices some sort of taste that is then being popular among, say, your peers and so on. And just to give you like brief example of what I mean, today if you like research something that ethnomusicologists call like traditional folklore music, Romani folklore or Romani folk music, it's actually related to what was popular in Hungary in 19th century. So the story was that there was this demand from 19th century Hungarian bosses, say, non-Roma, who wanted Roma to play their music. And they started playing this music. They started playing Csardáse, they started playing Hallgató, but they liked it and they brought it home and they started performing it at home. So Roma actually developed their own lyrics. And today, what ethnomusicologists mark as the oldest layer of this Romani folklore is actually, the music of gaje from the 19th century. And what I mean is there's like a hybridity that, it's like chicken egg question. What was first? Was there first the musical taste or the way we are able and willing to sort of change the music of majority? And so where does the taste end and where does the economic sort of intentionality begin? I think it's a really fascinating question. It's really something that I need to be aware that not like all manifestation of Romani ethnicity or musical stage are intentional, and some of them are indeed part of certain like musical aesthetic. They like to perform it because they like it this way, and not just that some stupid guy to pay for it.
Thank you.
Nick?
Peter, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it. I have a list of things that I would like to discuss with you on our way back.
Wow.
And just to make it brief, I have one question, and I'm not sure if it's a good question because I have some limits to musical theory, but I felt like that you draw a very sharp distinction between Western and Romani music in a way. But at the same time, if I'm right, this Western music is based on this equal temperament, and the Roma musicians, as I saw, they use pretty much the same instruments with the same tuning. So in a way, you can say that their music still remains Western. And I mean, this might not have any like significance, but at the same time, I feel that there might be some, because in a way, for example, just one example, right, that when it comes to some theories of dominance, then the minorities, they try to find some ways of resistance, right? But if this is a resistance, then it's within the confines of the majority, because it's not like employing like radically different music, right? Like, let's say, Indonesian folk music.
That's a good example, by the way. I think that answers your question pretty much. No?
Well, this was just an example, right? What you can do with the fact that you realize that the Romani music is in a way Western music, right?
Absolutely, that's a great point. And thanks for raising this up. That I think you put it in your words, like resistance with it confines. You always like do rebellion and the field where you are allowed to. And I think this has like pragmatical reason that basically the Romani musicians generations back then, when they were performing the music for majority, they basically grabbed the instrument that were available. Right, so that's why the example that I've already mentioned, that Balkan-based brass orchestra, they use microtonal, stuff, just because they have the freedom to do it. But you cannot be quite microtonal when it comes to accordion, for example. You can be quite microtonal when it comes to guitar, to be honest. And I think, and you actually, it's another point that is related to it a little bit, because when I had like sort of preliminary presentation about Romani chords for my Durham colleagues. There was Professor Tomas Erola, who's really like great guy in music cognition, and he told me like, why do you even need MIDI? Isn't the color of the instrument also like important? Because with MIDI analysis, you basically say if you put like MIDI controller, it will always snap to what Ondra Skovica called Pythagorean way, what we call equal temperament, and so on. And I think there's something about it, because when you hear the gentleman playing in the video abstract, I don't think his guitar is like perfectly in tune. It's like so in tune. And funnily enough, I never seen anyone, like any Romani guitarist, who would have like a tuner. Like all of them are like big stage, thousands of people. He can barely hear his guitar and just like tuning according to his hearing. And I think there's some anthropological significance about it. Like, why would you waste your time with tuning? People are interested to hear music. It doesn't matter, it's slightly out of tune, And then the question of color is actually coming in. And so I think, it's a great question. But to conclude, you always need to do your rebellion stuff within certain confines. And another thing is that, for analysis, it's going to be even more confined. So I'm going to really follow sort of simplified grid of the phenomenon that is happening. And maybe for the guitar, you may consider whether there may be some like parallel way to actually get the same experiment than with real guitar and see how it's all shifted, whether it does have significance or not. So great comments and.
Okay, do you have 3 questions? Maybe 4 questions now. So now Jack.
Okay, I'll be quick. Petr, thanks a lot. That was brilliant. It seems to me that you picked some important skills of your interlocutors, namely the flexibility and almost of hraně do uška. I saw you 6 months ago, and you adjusted the talk, and there's no way I can use my critique from back then. So that's absolutely amazing. I love it. But I have a methodological question that is not absolutely clear to me. It slightly follows what Nick said, but much more the suggestion of Tina. But I would like to use the trick of I'm also learning from your interlocutors, right? So I would like to turn Tina's point on its head, and instead of suggesting that you go across Europe and elsewhere, possibly to the US, and do comparative data generation in different Romani communities. I wondered whether you were planning to collect some data using the same robust methodological repertoire you have on non-Romani musicians of Slovakia, and especially those who compete for the same niches of, say, like local weddings and you name it, because that would be very interesting, right? It seems to me that sometimes you are comparing, but the depth of knowledge and the methodological sophistication on the two ends of comparison is hardly comparable in a way, right? So that's my question, and I know it's all about resources and time and so on, but still I think this is quite important.
Yeah, it's a brilliant point actually, and I have been thinking about it, and was also like one of the major point of criticism when I was defending my MA thesis, that actually I'm I'm describing something as typically Romani while it's coming from sort of general musical aesthetic, general musical knowledge, general musical perception, and so on. So you could have the same, sort of habitus for any sort of pop musician, whether Romani or non-Romani, elsewhere in the world. And I guess this is not to deny your point, but my counter-argument in my thesis is that it is, coming from the ethnography as being described as this is the Romani way. Gadget do it differently, we do it this way, and then whether it's true, whether the mirror is rightly set, it's also sort of becoming research inquiry. It's not it's actually interesting way to learn how Romani musicians perceive non-Romani, because it's certainly some point of reference for their own music making and for their own endeavors. And I think this is absolutely brilliant way of actually quickly checking whether the mirror is just fake or whether it's, there's something about it. And possibly the best method is indeed to do like, how you call it in the medical research, you do the group A and group B and give them the same medicine and look what you get. This would be interesting. And probably we would learn that there's no such thing as Romani chord, but the perception of Roma about their own way of making is so strong that, that it would make them believe that this is actually, something specific for them as an ethnic group, as Roma. And yeah, it's a great point. Let's see what the resources will be like, and if this is going to be possible, then I'm happy to try with you guys, with Nicola, for example.
Okay, there's another question in chat regarding gender perspective, your research.
Yes, that's a good one. I'm going to read it aloud, right? I hope it's yes. Thank you for a very nice presentation. I would like to ask if you take into account gender perspective methodologically. I mean, like possible differences in personal repertory and then different harmonic strategies and their occurrence in your examination. That's such a great point, and I'm actually sorry that I didn't make it as sort of third prerequisite of the talk or really like strong disclaimer, because throughout the presentation, I was referring to Romani men, to Romani male musicians, and the reason why is that there are practically no instrumental players, no instrumental musicians in my field, in the context of my field. And this is something that is, I would say, like very firmly grained into Romani culture in general, that if you are a musician, Romani musician, female musician, you can take part in, say, singing. You're very welcome to sing in a band, but then once you get married, you are supposed to do other things. And it was also, I have to say, quite a challenge for the project, because as you know, European Commission is quite keen on delivering clean message on how your research is going to impact this like sort of gender equality and what are the gender dimension of the research. And so I needed to be very careful there, because I knew that if I was to claim that half of my research participants will be female, it would completely destroy the picture, because it would be so, artificial, this division, this like this gender balance, that it would just ruin the entire research. So instead, what I was trying to argue was that through knowing how actually, like male performance, because honestly, Romani music performance is not just performance of Romanes, but also I would say a very immanent performance of manhood. And I think if we understand, the performance of manhood, then we can easily understand this sort of unbalanced view between Romani male musicians and Romani female musicians. And of course, I also promised to actually take a look on the female perspective, but not directly through the sessions that I envision in the in the video abstract, for example, but also just taking time and have some like semi-structured interview with like female family members. What they think about what these guys are doing actually in whether on stage or at households. So this is a really good point, and yeah, I guess to wrap up, it's not going to be very much gender balanced, this research, sadly. But this is really the socio-cultural reality in contemporary Romani music making.
Perfect. Andre?
Okay, thank you so much. I follow up a little bit on the question of the resistance within the confines of the Pythagorean environment. I wanted to ask, so your project is partly about, in a way, transcribing what the music is sonically and visually. So, and I was wondering, the history that we heard, kind of, so there is a part in the late 19th century that you were referring to, and there is today YouTube tutorials, and but has there been some kind of classification, let's say classical appropriation or notification and fixation of Roma music in the 20th century, either by writing down notes or by recording, that also has a kind of a feedback loop onto the practices of your interlocutors?
Right, absolutely, yes. I cannot give you an example from my field, probably it's going to illustrate in the best way. So there are a lot of Romani musicians that I know that play, they call it like classical instruments, or they call it traditional hudba, actually, traditional instrument, traditional music, and they are employed as member of the folklore ensembles. You know, that's in Slovakia, it's quite a big thing. So there are many peculiarities, such as, you know, none of the folk member gets paid, but the Romani musicians, and they have been indeed Roma for generations, right? So it's a bit of a funny position. And now to your question, there are recordings from, you know, like basically ancestor of today's musicians, of today's member of the folklore, and when they go for a competition, they are forced to actually play like their ancestors.
Oh.
And they suffer terribly because the recordings are horrible. They, you know, admit that, you know, he was, I mean, they say he was a good fiddle player, but for today's standard, it's just like, it's nothing. You know, you can have like out of tune note that actually they say in this like folklore ensemble competition, they would say, no, this is authentic. This is how our ancestor actually played it. So they are a little bit confined in, especially in this field of like Slovak folk ensemble music. They are really trapped in this this sort of, they should play authentically. And it's really funny because when you go for the rehearsals, and when, you know, the dancers are on the break, they start playing jazz, they start playing classic that they learn in music schools, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, stop this bullshit, now let's play authentically. And they just like play this very authentic, simple Slovak folk ensemble music. So I think even my chapter of the thesis that actually deals with this phenomenon is actually called "I Want to Break Free," because I noticed that for some musicians, it really puts too much confinement and very little joy, and they really would like to actually do some creative stuff, but they are trapped in this how their ancestor actually played it. So this is one niche where it really occurs as a phenomenon.
Perfect. Daria Stadelová.
Thank you, Peter, for your spectacular presentation. My question will be maybe more ethnomusicological. I would like to know, what about the authorities? Who is the authority? I mean, the gatekeeper, for example. Does exist something like gatekeepers? I mean, somebody who say what is and what is not Romani chords.
Mm-hmm.
And who is competent to do this? And my second question is, what about transmission? Did you research systematically the transmission of chords, Romani chords? For example, when somebody is learning children, and how happened this process?
Of transmission, you mean?
Yes, the transmission process.
Okay, two great questions. So who is the gatekeeper for me to say what is chord? It's actually going to be challenge, I have to say. And it's going to be arbitrary, I'm sure. It's also because the sonic analysis. And, when I was sort of designing this research methodology, I spoke to some IT people, and they told me, what do you think it's obvious? Like what is chord and what is song? It's not so obvious for the machines. You need to actually arbitrarily say this bit is chord, this bit is song, this bit is a phrase, and so on. So I'm afraid that the question to your answer, who is going to be gatekeeper, it's going to be me actually, and it's going to be arbitrary, and I will try to be really clear in this, why I've chosen this form of arbitrarity and so on. But eventually, especially for the data analysis and so on, it's going to be me. Right, and the second question, was it?
And maybe also, how happened the negotiation about what is and what is not?
Yeah, I hope that what may help is the third leg upon which the methodology stands. That is the ethnographic part. That I'll be able to complement, the sonic data with their help. That I would ask. So what do you mean by this chord is upside down? And there will be some explanation that would hopefully sort of confine this analytical material into bits that can be analyzed. But at the same time, it's going to be arbitrary, and I need to be really clear about this. And the transmission, no, this is actually research that I'm looking forward to, and I did see some stuff in the field, but I didn't put any analytical effort to actually study it. And I think this is going to be one of the main challenges of the project, to really see whether such thing as visual-based transmission of fingers configuration, does it really happen this way? Is it something that can be analyzed and something from which we can draw any conclusion? So it's to be done, I would say, and I'm looking forward to it. Maybe I'll see that there's no such thing as chord transmission, and eventually it's sort of redeveloped in the brain of each and particular musician that you cannot tell. And at the same time, you can be surprised that there are indeed Romani chords that trace back for generations and through regions. But it's really something for dedicated research to actually see.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the questions.
So one more question in the chat from
Right.
and then Martin Popper.
Okay, Peter, thanks for explaining to me why within 5 minutes into a Roma band gig I start crying. At Zdeněk's seminar last year, we learned how Czech folklore musicians often take what they hear in recordings of folklore music by professional, formally trained musicians as a standard they wish to emulate and replicate. Is it also the case with Roma musicians with whom you work? In other words, to what extent is their music influenced by professional recordings, if they exist? Right. I think it's somewhat related to what I was trying to explain to Andre. So it's very common, especially in the field of this folklore ensemble music, where for very strange reasons and interesting reasons, Roma have their very firm place. So there's, for example, the two towns where I did my research, Kokava, Drimaviso, and Klanovec. If you look at 100 years old pictures, they are still Romani musicians, and it's been so for generations. And these particular folklore ensemble musicians are indeed connected with early recordings of their older self or their family members. Right. I hope I covered this better. If not, just let me know. I hope I was.
But if I understand correctly, Petr is probably asking, what about contemporary Roma professionals, which might be considered something like an example how Roma music should look like. So if let's say I didn't want to
That's one. Why don't you tell us?
By himself, probably.
You're muted.
No, thanks very much for the talk. No, I'm sorry I'm a bit unclear, and I also realized that you probably answered the question to some extent to Andres' question, but no, I just remembered the next seminar last year and how amateur folklore musicians from, for example, with Bohemia are kind of taking what they hear from the radio recordings that are made by professional musicians who are not folklore musicians, but professionally trained musicians, as something they should sort of aspire to in their own performance as amateur musicians. So I was just wondering, to what extent this kind of interrelationship can be seen, or whether it exists at all in kind of Roma music.
Okay, I can try to answer this question from the completely different angle, which is the role of recordings in sort of Romani musical production in general. Because what I think is peculiar, I when I was talking about this transmission, visual-based transmission, and how it differs from like sheet note-based transmission. I think this is really the key how Romani musicians grow into their music repertoire through listening, and now it's really strengthened from YouTube. So, for example, my eldest research participants, they really listen to recordings. They had this tape recorders, and they recorded it on from radio to a tape, and then they were listening it over and over again, and they were like slowing down and really learning. So what I mean is that the recordings in general, they play a really significant role in how whole repertoire was transmitted. And now it really depends, because Romani music, like I said, it's like defined by its great variability, and you wouldn't even believe how variable is within like this relatively small field when I've done my research. So even then there are like differences. So what I would say is that for some of the musicians, these recordings were really like vehicles for being as perfect as possible. What I mean is that they consider it as a tool how to learn repertoire, like a carbon copy, basically. And at the same time, you have musicians, like nowadays, around this folk ensembles, who are forced to listen to, like the older generations of folk ensemble, and they are actually forced to, so to speak, repeat the same simplicity, if you like, and not taking anything like any point of creativity. Yeah, I guess that's to make very long answer short.
Okay, thank you. And probably the last question from Martin.
Well, if we don't have time, I can.
We still have time for one question.
Okay, I have just two comments basically. So these are not questions, and you don't have to respond to them.
Wow.
What
a privilege.
No, I really enjoyed your presentation, but I think especially now at the end, it just also became clear to me, like from what Dr. Kastavilova and Andres were saying about gatekeeping and annotation and fixing and so on. You have also a great responsibility on your own shoulders, because basically here's going to be an ethnographer who is going to say, these are the Romani chords. And somebody is going to go back to them, and within the local politics, they're going to say like, hey, no. These are the Romani chords. So, and it's like, and it sounds slightly as a joke, but like if you're speaking about decolonization and of the knowledge and so on, you have to take this really seriously, because one thing is something on the YouTube where you're watching your father or grandfather playing, and another thing is, the scholar basically saying like, hey, look at this MIDI annotation, this is a Romani chord. And one of the things I want to also suggest is like when you were talking about these people who sort of straddle, because like the person you were talking about can read the notes or write the notes, but at the same time, straddles these both worlds. Maybe one of the methodological things you can consider is to think with them how you would visualize these things. So instead of you kind of making it up, where they're like, those dots on a guitar, maybe think with them, as a type of a collaborative project, as a suggestion to kind of overcome these type. So that's just one comment. The other comment is, especially on your first leg on ethnicity, and I would not start with that. I mean, particularly because, of course, the greatest self-proclaimed Barthian in Czech Republic is from the Western Bohemian, Western Bohemian anthropologist, or from the University of Western Bohemia, but I mean, but the reason why I'm saying it is because, I mean, in some ways it leads you to silly questions or misleads you. Like, we're saying like, hey, these people don't want to hang out with other Roma. And you go like, well, why would they? Just because, they are identified as Roma. And the thing is that, for instance, Patrick Williams had shown on speaking on Sinti, is that actually precisely this avoidance of somebody is a type of a recognition, right? I mean, in their case, it was an avoidance because they don't share the same dead people, they don't pay the same respect, they don't avoid the same places. We cannot actually camp with them because then we would break some kind of taboos. So it's preferably to avoid. So actually, avoidance is a part of the recognition. And this same thing happens possibly with Fajtas in Slovakia, with all kinds of rasas in Spain and all kinds of things. So I wouldn't, I mean, and then it also means that going much deeper into, instead of saying like, oh, this is performance of ethnicity and this is not performance of ethnicity, which starts with the concept of ethnicity. This is all problem of Barth. You start with ethnicity and then you look for boundaries. Is there a boundary? No, it isn't the boundary. I mean, instead of going back to Patrick Williams, he shows that, this Manouche would be playing some sort of jazz, but then there is some jazz that they present as jazz manouche to the outsiders, but then there is a certain type of jazz, certain types of songs that they play only among themselves. So they become part of, very emotionally loaded within families and so on. And all of them are in some way jazz manouche, but it's played at different levels, at different, so instead of going like, hey, is this performance of ethnicity, maybe look at what particular songs, particular musical experimentation, what it does in particular contexts and for whom. You see what I mean? So I would not start with an ethnic group and look for the vessel. That's just that's a typical Barthian thing, right? A typical thing.
So completely rewrite the entire project.
No, I think I
think you are aiming at it, but I wouldn't even start with it. It's like, hey, is this the management of ethnicity? Just look at what it does, precisely what you just said. You don't need Barth or ethnicity for that. You just say like, hey, this is what it does here. Here it's to earn money. Here it's because it resembles, here it's us being drunk.
Yep. That's great comments. I would use my right not to respond because. But yeah, thanks. What I think is, it's. I realized that this ethnicity part was a bit of simplification, and I just wanted to introduce the whole concept and then just narrow it down to this performative part of the ethnicity, which I think is really important and really essential when it comes to Romani music performance. But I take your point absolutely, and it's great. Yeah.
So again, thank you.